Most people think having high standards means defining a set of rules and setting boundaries. But if that were enough, clarity alone would have changed your life by now. If you're new here, I am Chris O, the host of PS Younger Self, and this is part 12 of the Living by Your Standards series, because your real standards don't live on paper. They're not static. They live in the moments where you are activated. They show up when something feels off, when old habits start to resurface, when the emotional pull or old conditioning or pressures externally or internally starts to enter the room and confuse you. And the question isn't whether you know your standards. It's more about whether you've built the capacity to live by them in those moments. And stick around because I'm going to explain what I mean by capacity in this context to live by your standards. See, this series wasn't just about having and raising your standards. Yes, I speak about that from the very beginning of the series, and it's very important, and I advocate for that. But the series has been also about building the internal capacity to live by those standards you set. Because yes, you can claim your standards because they matter. Yes, raising them matters, and I want you to do that. And yes, getting really clear on your values matters, because remember, your standards are reflective of your personal values and principles. But clarity alone doesn't create embodiment to live by them. Remember, we spoke about how clarity actually forces you to act on that clarity. See, so standards gives you the direction you want to lead into the life you want to create. But capacity is what allows you to stay aligned with those standards you say matters. Again, stick around. I'm going to explain that further. And that's why this entire series, Living by Your Standards, has been building towards, not by perfection, not by control, but building the capacity to lead with self-leadership in order to live by your standards. See, your standards are your belief system, right? If they are shaped by your values and principles, they reflect what you believe matters to you. And that's why they're personal to you. It's how you believe that you want to lead. It's how you believe you should show up for yourself or in relationships or at work. It's how you believe you want to treat yourself and what that means to you. But believing something deeply doesn't automatically mean you live by it, right? Because that's just in theory, in concept. That's where capacity comes in order for you to live by your belief system. See, living by your standards day in and day out will require capacity. Again, capacity. What do I mean by that in this context? When I say capacity, I'm not talking about being perfect. I'm not talking about suppressing your emotion. I'm not talking about having some energetic capacity or physical capacity or a certain discipline or willpower to live by your standards. And I'm definitely not talking about fixing something about yourself, because nothing is wrong. Nothing is broken. But what I mean by capacity is this internal skill set you develop to choose alignment even when emotions, old conditioning, past versions of yourself gets activated. Because real life doesn't test your standards when things are calm and easy, right? We all know that. It's tested when there's an emotional charge within ourselves or with somebody else, when attachment shows up, when old patterns want to override your conscious awareness to be in alignment. When doubt creeps in, when social pressures are present, or maybe it's your internal pressure. The work isn't to eliminate any of those forces, internal or external, which is because that's all part of being human. It's all part of the felt experience of being human. The work is more about what you do not allow to lead you, so you become more self-governed and more self-led by your standards. So when I say this series has also been about building the capacity to live by your standards, I want to be very, very clear what that actually looks like, what I mean by that, because it wasn't random. This 12-part series that started in January was very intentional because every part was built on a specific internal skill set within your capacity skill stack. Let's look at it that way. It's a skill stack that will empower you, enable you to live by your standards. So first, you learn to identify where you may be prioritizing expectations over standards and to understand the clear difference between expectations and standards so you stop conflating them, which is very common and what leads to disappointment, frustration, and suffering. And then you saw how expectations tie to emotional state to external outcomes because of attachment to an external outcome. And then you began shifting towards standards that are internally aligned by your value system, that are self-governed. This is where your responsibility came back to you. The capacity built here was the ability to anchor yourself in your emotional state without letting it be dictated by somebody else's behavior or something external from you. Next, you defined your values because we learned that standards are reflective of your personal values and principles and not the values you inherited by your parents or your culture or your society, not the values you think you should have, but the values that truly deeply matter to you. And that's why they are all personal. Because you can't live by standards that aren't anchored into something intrinsic to you. This built the direction of knowing why you choose what you choose. Becoming more consciously aware of why you choose something. Then you built self-assurance, not self-confidence, because that can waver. But self-assurance is this deep-rooted trust within yourself of your own judgment, time in and time out, regardless of external pressures or doubt that may creep in without needing anybody else's validation or over explaining. This is what allows your values to lead without approval from anyone. That built your internal authority system. From there, you've learned to cultivate discernment, which is to learn to read energy before words are even spoken. Discernment allows you to notice misalignment without needing proof. To trust subtle internal signals that something may be off or aligned. Discernment allows alignment to speak really, really quietly. This built your early recognition, the ability to see misalignment before chaos even occurs. Then you acted with clarity. You learn something important with clarity because clarity isn't always peaceful. It's actually quietly directive because clarity shows you what alignment requires, even when it may cost you your comfort. And this built the willingness to act on what you know. Next, you learned boundaries, which is not about punishment on other people, which is not about ultimatums at all, but it's more about self-honoring the actions that you say matter to stay aligned with those standards. Because boundaries are how standards become visible to others, even though I believe that living by your standards is more quiet and an internal system than shouting or saying out loud of how you are showing up every day. And then we explored accountability. And what I mean by accountability here is that's not self-punishment, but it's about self-responsibility to stay aligned every time, even when it becomes hard. Accountability allows you to course correct in real time without turning against yourself, without shaming yourself. It allows you to build that consistency over time without being rigid. And then you stepped into courage. This courage to learn that discomfort that may arise when you start to raise your standards is not a sign that something is wrong, that you're doing something off, that it's a sign that you are growing into who you are becoming. And that is a courage to continue on that path. You practice staying grounded when things felt unfamiliar and uncomfortable. This built your internal stability under pressure. Then you learn to navigate relationships with your high standards. That's relationships with your friends. That's with your family dynamics. That's within your work relationships. And of course, your romantic relationship. You learn to let go of the expectations on others and allow alignment or misalignment start to reveal itself naturally, to observe and to act on that. So your standards don't force alignment. They reveal it. And by navigating relationships with the high standards, it builds your relational self-leadership. Again, the ability to lead within yourself, with your self-trust in these relational dynamics. And then finally, you learn to reassess and refine your standards as you grow, because your standards aren't static. They don't live on paper. They will evolve as you continue on this growth journey. You're going to evolve, right? So that your standards will evolve with you. And none of these are isolated teachings. Together, they form your internal system, and why I call it your capacity skill stack that allows you to then stay aligned with your standards amid all the different forces that may want to pull you back into old familiar patterns. So here's the honest part. Awareness doesn't erase old patterns, and that's not the whole point. It shortens the distance between an impulse and your choice. And when those old versions of you that may still show up, we spoke about this. It's that micro moment, knowing what identity you want to choose to lead in those micro moments when old patterns, old conditionings may want to override what you consciously know is aligned. And that is the growth within your capacity. So living by your standards doesn't look bold. It's not supposed to look bold, as I mentioned. It's more quiet, and it's less about explaining to other people. It's less about proving, seeking validation. And it's also not about negotiating with yourself. It is grounded. It is led with discernment, with clarity, with self-assurance, building that ability to anchor yourself and stay steady in your choices that don't need an audience, because you are so self-assured about the choices you are making and can stay accountable for them. So if you've been here since the very beginning of the Living by Your Standards series, from part 1 in January, first of all, congratulations on your commitment to your personal growth in living by your standards. I really applaud you for that. And I thank you for joining me along this year-long journey, because I believe now you're really building the capacity, again, to live by them, not just having and setting your high standards, but building the internal skill stack to live by them day in and day out. And that capacity will continue to deepen, because you're not fixing yourself. It's not just one and done, but It's a continued practice to choose alignment, to choose self-leadership. When all these external forces and old conditioning will try to sway you away from what you know is consciously aligned. So if this resonated with you, I invite you to download a free worksheet that I created, Expectations and Standards Worksheet. It is a self-guided worksheet to help you identify where you may be leading by unconscious expectations. And that is just the beginning. Just the beginning, because I'm really, really excited to announce that I will be sharing and launching the full Living by Your Standards workbook in the beginning of the year. So stick around. It is a complimentary, in-depth workbook created for women just like you who feel seen and shifted by this series and who are ready finally to move on from just having the insight and knowledge and knowing and awareness into lived practice. Because we know insight alone does not change behavior. If this series gave you the language and the perspective and the awareness to see your patterns more clearly, this workbook that I'm going to be releasing is designed to help you start to integrate that awareness by strengthening the internal skills, decisions, and daily choices that allow you to finally live by your standards every single day. So be sure to download the free worksheet first so you can start living by your standards and be the first to be notified when the full workbook will be released early in the new year. I cannot wait. And thank you really for joining me on this entire journey to live by your standards. And again, I congratulate you on that journey. I hope the new year brings you clarity, grounded self-trust, and the self-assurance to live in alignment with what truly matters to you. Thank you so much for being with me, and I hope to see you again in the new year.